Hello, good evening and welcome to this ongoing series of BBC interviews with the party leaders in the election. I'm Brian Taylor and joining me is Alex Salmond, Scotland's First Minister and the SNP leader. Hello there, Mr. Salmond. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've had the court case today about the issue of the final prime ministerial debate, the one due to be hosted by the BBC. What's your reaction to the court verdict throughout the interdict?
Well, I'm obviously disappointed I'm not getting to take part in the debate tomorrow, particularly one on the economy. I think it's unfair to the SNP. I think it's unfair to Scotland. However, we've got a June hearing for a judicial review, and that won't do us any good for this election, but, there might be an election in October, who knows? But there are underlying principles here of access and fairness which have to be thought through and debated properly. This is not just for one election or one Christmas, this is for every Christmas and every election, and we are determined that Scotland's voice must be heard. In the meantime, we'll just take our case to the country. This is a leaflet, as they say, we prepared earlier with the most famous
except
BBC,
for viewers in Scotland.
Except for viewers in Scotland. I honestly, I think it's a pretty dark period in the BBC, because whatever the people thought about the BBC, they thought it was fair, balanced, impartial. Whatever other criticisms people had. And that's now, as far as Scotland is concerned, in my view, in substantial jeopardy.
Do you believe, I don't want to dwell on this too much, I'll get on very quickly to the main issues, but do you believe perhaps you should, on reflection, have brought the case earlier, as the judge appeared to feel?
Well, that was the BBC's submission. The problem we had was this, that until you had the first debate, when we could claim that this was going to have a devastating impact on the election campaign, consume the election campaign, until you had the first debate, you couldn't demonstrate that, and therefore would have lacked evidence. And secondly, of course, and probably crucially, we were going through, in polite and proper manner, the BBC's internal procedures, and it was only last Thursday that the BBC Trust ruled against us. And if we'd gone to court before that, then the argument from the BBC would have been, you haven't gone through or exhausted the internal procedures. So I think we were right to stick up for ourselves, because if you can't stick up for yourself, you can't stick up for Scotland. I think that this argument has a long way to go. I just think it's deplorable that broadcasters, and the BBC in particular, should be hand in glove with the London parties in denying free access and democratic access for the parties of Scotland and Wales.
Well, as you say, no doubt this issue will resurface when you bring it back to the court in June. Let's move on to the issues of this election. Mr. Salmond, you're suggesting that your party would be able to fend off cuts in Scottish spending. Are you really saying that there would be no cuts in public spending in Scotland at all, given the state of the parlous state of the economy?
No, I'm not saying that. In fact, we're the only party thus far, and I think the other parties will be forced onto this ground, perhaps in the BBC debate tomorrow, to spell out the true nature of the huge public spending cuts that are coming from London, Labour, Liberal, Conservative, all planning cuts at the same extent.
You've said all that, but how can you protect Scotland
I'm coming
from
to that. Well, three ways, Brian. Firstly, we've laid out the things that we would cut. The big ticket, the prestige items, the irrelevant items, over the next 15 years, it's 50 to 60 billion pounds on a Trident missile system, 5 billion pounds in the remnants of the ID card system, 4 billion pounds on a nuclear dump receptacle. We'd sweep away the House of Lords, the Scotland Office. That can make a substantial contribution to that gaping hole that the London parties are not facing up to, and help protect the things that really matter to people. But that's not enough, because this Labour government has led us into an economic calamity, and therefore there's two other features which are absolutely crucial. One is, and I'll be spelling this out in a speech tomorrow before the BBC debate, in which we look at the growth trajectory of the Scottish economy, because we're in this mess because of the lost growth, and we'll be looking about how we can recapture that growth and therefore get people back into work with more revenue. And thirdly, the question of efficiency savings. We have a validated programme of efficiency savings in the Scottish Government over the last few years. Now, we've been using these to enhance services. Over the next few years, on that trajectory of efficiency savings, we'll have to use it to defend services, maintain services. A combination of these three things can fill that gap, but we're the only party
Let's deal with
addressing that issue.
Deal with a couple of points you're raising there. Trident, first of all. Your manifesto talks about 100 billion cost for Trident, not the 50 or 60 billion that you mentioned today. And secondly, with regard to Trident, that's talking about future spending. It's like saying that you've paid for the TV, the fridge, and the microwave, or you've bought those on tick. You've got the debt mounting for those, and you're saying, but I'm not going to buy that big posh car and stick that in the drive. Well, that doesn't help you with the costs of the TV, the fridge and the microwave. You've still got to pay that debt.
Okay. The Trident 100 billion is to 2040. That's the life cycle of the programme. The figure of 50 to 60 billion is for the next 15 years. And the reason I chose 15 years is because that is the forecast that's been laid out by the Scottish Government economists.
But scrapping Trident doesn't tackle the accumulated debt that we have now.
I'm coming to the second bit of your question. I mean, let's remember that if you decide, as we would, and stand full square against Trident, you don't only save the $1.5 billion a year capital costs, you save the $2 billion plus a year running costs of that nuclear system. It adds up to a very substantial
and perhaps
amount.
Shed thousands of Scottish jobs in the by-going, according to your rivals.
Yes, but as you're well aware, and folk can consult the STUC website, a very detailed economic study made the case that expenditure in Trident deployed in virtually any other useful economic activity would defend far, far more jobs. I mean, far better to maintain jobs in our great public services than to have a situation of wasting 50 to 60 billion pounds over 15 years on Trident missiles. But the point I was going to make to you, the best way to look at this, and this is what the London parties have been refusing to admit, it's like an iceberg election. They've been arguing over that small bit over the surface and leaving out this yawning gulf of mass of public spending cuts below the surface. Now that amounts in UK terms, on the best assumptions, to £250 billion over the next 15 years. Therefore, to save £50 to £60 billion on Trident, it's not all of that gap, it's not all of that lack of public spending, but it is a substantial amount.
But there's a debt.
20-25%.
That's talking about future debt, Mr. Sam. There's a debt now. There's nearly £1 trillion of accumulated public sector debt in the UK economy now, and Scotland presumably has to bear a share of that. Never mind about future spending plans.
No, well, it's not quite a trillion yet, but I mean the issue that has led us into that accumulated debt, and more appropriately into the massive borrowing, is the decline in output of the economy of over 6%, probably 10%
well, we
lost
know that,
output.
but how can you fend Scotland away? How do you defend Scotland, protect Scotland from these cuts?
As I'll be laying out, we've got an alternative to that miserable 15 years, which is promised by all of the unionist parties. When I say promised, I'm not admitting to it, but it's clear from the assumptions behind their forecast. We have an alternative which is based on don't waste money on the things that don't matter, concentrate on the things that do matter, increase the growth in the Scottish economy, and we're laying out how to do that. And running forward, proven efficiency savings and how that can make a contribution to meeting this public sector challenge.
Let me pick you up on the efficiency savings. Audit Scotland, the watchdog, spending watchdog, say that we're facing the greatest financial pressure since devolution, 7 to 13% cuts in real terms expected over the next 4 years, and efficiency savings just won't cut the mustard. They don't do enough. Secondly, your Permanent Secretary of your own government, Sir John Elvidge, is planning for 20% cuts in real terms over 7 years. Thirdly, Andrew Gowdy, your chief economist, your government's chief economist, is talking about cuts of 35 billion. I know all of the levels. I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you that the levels of cuts are going to be huge. What I'm saying is, how do you defend Scotland?
Let's get this right. The statements you've just made, and particularly the Andrew Gowdy statement, I launched the Andrew Gowdy paper last week.
I know that.
And the reason I did it...
I'm not disputing the extent of the cuts that are coming. I'm saying, how do you defend Scotland
The reason
from
I did it is because I thought it was high time some honesty was injected into this issue of public spending, and that's exactly why we did it. And I've just laid out, we're not relying...
How do you protect Scotland from these cuts?
I'm coming to your question. I'm not relying on efficiency savings alone. We're saying there are free processes in which to close that massive public spending gap, and I've laid them out. Don't waste money on things that don't matter. Yes, efficiency savings, but economic growth is a critical part of this pathway to recovery. That's why it's a three-pronged strategy, not relying on any one aspect. And incidentally, it's far better to face up to the issue and say this is what we would do and offer people a choice in the election than just not talk about it, which is what the London parties are doing.